When Eddie Bravo referred to a striking coach suggesting his student was Bangkok ready, he meant looking something like Carlos Prates.
This motherfucker.
Even Hunter Gracie came out throwing
Do you
jabs.
remember what he said? Do you remember what he said to him?
He's Bangkok ready.
Yes.
In 6 months,
Yes.
he said it was Bangkok ready. He's going to go out there. So
Now this may have held more weight 10 years ago, where seeing a fighter compete in a Bangkok stadium was a rare sight, reserved only for a handful of elite Western fighters. But Prates is certainly the real deal Holyfield when it comes to Muay Thai experience. This man might just be the best Muay Thai fighter in the UFC. The Brazilian has racked up nearly 100 bouts in both Muay Thai and kickboxing, and he's even gone as far as adopting the lifestyle choices of a veteran Nak Muay, with the UFC star claiming to smoke cigarettes daily. So, let's break down the style of the man they call the Nightmare. Prates switches between a wide base, hands down boxing look, into a weight into the back foot Muay Thai style. A lot of this is down to how his opponent is choosing to fight and what Prates thinks he can get away with. Listed as 6'1" with a 78-inch reach, he's a tall and rangy welterweight, and he fights in a way which maximises his advantages. When he is looking to counterpunch, he will distribute most of his weight into his back leg. With a slight lean, he brings his head further away from his opponent, forcing him to reach further in order to punch him, whilst keeping his own backhand loaded and ready to go. Southpaw kickboxers like Tenshin Nasukawa and Giorgio Petrosian apply a similar strategy. His looks play directly into both his offensive and defensive options. When he's in stadium Nak Muay mode, bouncing the lead leg, he has a more narrowed stance, making his legs readily available. He'll be more inclined to lift them to block kicks or use an intercepting teep to prevent an opponent from bridging the gap. A Thai fighter will hold their feet when defending as it enables them to counter quickly. This is why you'll often see the rally of back and forth exchanges, particularly with kicks, that you'll seldom see in a mixed martial arts contest. The primary defence in MMA is to use footwork to get out of the way. The Dutch style of kickboxing is earmuffs on, absorb every strike on the gloves and arms, and fire back with a barrage of hands into a low kick. This is way less effective in 4-ounce gloves, and if you're a long-time viewer of the Pro Striking channel, you'll understand exactly why. Prates has a blend between the two. Here you can clearly see the difference between Prates' style when fighting traditional Muay Thai, kickboxing and mixed martial arts. He makes subtle adaptations to suit each rule set. In Muay Thai, he'll use a long guard combined with a raised lead leg. He uses the single arm long guard with just the lead arm extended, and the double long guard with both arms extended, which enables him to tie up into a clinch if the opponent commits their punches. This is a great way of getting a feel of where the opponent is, using the shoulders to protect the chin and intercept and jam up any oncoming punches. However, with the fingerless gloves, it's quite easy to poke an opponent in the eye. Just go look at John Jones. In kickboxing and mixed martial arts, we see Prates utilise a high guard and head movement more for his defence than what we'd see him do in Muay Thai. Here we see him hands down, full flow, turning with the punches Canelo style, which is a nice wrinkle to his game. He can use this adjustment in kickboxing as clinch is prohibited, and the fighters will punch more due to the nature of the scoring criteria. Elbows are also prohibited within kickboxing. MMA has all the dangers of Muay Thai, with clinch and elbows being permitted, but because of the smaller gloves, the long guard is a little more dangerous as punches can still slip through and cause more damage. Fighters also don't use the clinch in the same way in mixed martial arts. It is more to transition to a takedown attempt rather than to actively strike, or just stall a fighter against the cage wall. Prates will hold his feet a lot less in mixed martial arts. As mentioned earlier, he adapts his defence depending on what his opponent is giving him. Here we see Prates defend multiple takedown attempts against the cage. As much as the cage can be a fighter's enemy when it comes to early stage defence, allowing a fighter to pin them against a flat surface and get deeper on an entry, it can also be a fighter's best friend, as it can be a tool to use to keep them standing, and it helps in protecting the back when coming back to the feet. As Prates is lanky for the weight, he has good balance, and he can be a hard man to take down by simply lifting the leg. If your leg is lifted above your hip, you will start to lose balance. And because Prates' hips are so high, you must lift his leg much higher in order to make him fall over. This makes single leg takedowns and trips more difficult against the Muay Thai stylist. And again, with his Muay Thai experience, he will be used to having his leg caught, as in Thai boxing, sweep attempts are permitted. The man has good balance on one leg. It's no surprise that Prates is a kicker given his extensive experience in Muay Thai and kickboxing. The left roundhouse kick to the body is a staple of any southpaw Nak Muay, and Prates isn't afraid to throw it in MMA. I like how he hasn't abandoned his roots in striking to adjust to the mixed martial arts rule entirely, and it does serve him well. With his long and lanky frame, he can sling them bones at opponents from just on the edge of range, and he can be really spiteful with it. If we examine Prates' look in Muay Thai, it isn't too dissimilar to how he appears in MMA. In Muay Thai, fighters will stand in much closer proximity to one another than how they would in mixed martial arts. Without the threat of a takedown, opponents can throw strikes with freedom. There is room for more volume because they haven't got to worry about their opponent's level changing underneath a punch. A great asset that comes from a Muay Thai kickboxing background is being able to put the hands and legs together. Being able to kick into a punch is a fantastic tool as it enables him to close the distance off of the back of a long range attack. Prates' knees are lethal, and I'd say it's his best weapon. The advantage of being tall in combat sports doesn't just apply to arm reach, but leg reach too. Prates' hips are very high, and his legs are long, which means his knees are a problem. It doesn't take much for him to lift one to the midsection, and he has a quick fire knee from the clinch. If you happen to be tall and training Muay Thai in Thailand, the trainers are much more likely to push you to be a Muay calf stylist and knee specialist, and they're going to get you training those knees immediately. Here we see Prates nail a fight-ending knee as him and his opponent enter a clinch. When entering a clinch, Prates likes to push the face of the opponent to turn them to the side and open their body for a knee. Pushing the face is a great defense if an opponent gets an umbrella hook around the neck or attempts to go for a collar tie. If their head is turning to the side, it makes it difficult for them to generate power with their own knees, and they'll be off balance if they try to front knee. Not only does this position create attacking options for Prates, but it is an extremely effective form of defense. This is much easier to do in sports like kickboxing and Muay Thai where the gloves are bigger, whereas a smaller glove in mixed martial arts can allow a fighter to slip their hand out. As Prates is a southpaw, his left knee is his primary weapon. Left side attacks will often be aimed to the right side of the opponent, which is where the liver is situated. A good knee to the midsection can be one of the fastest ways to end a fight. They talk about the liver shot in boxing being one of the best punches in the game, whereas the knee is a hard bony point that is completely unprotected. So one well-placed knee can really change the course of a bout. Here we see Prates lift a knee to counter his opponent as he steps into punch, and he instantly sends him reeling to the canvas. Notice how Prates turns his knee in with his heel pointing out. This sends the knee at the perfect angle to spear to the centre of an opponent's midsection. Boxing can be somewhat of an afterthought in Muay Thai and kickboxing. It's often used more to disguise kicks and knees than actively hurt the opponent. In Muay Thai, a fighter is likely to kick as soon as they see their opponent's hands leave their face, so the commitment on punches is often a lot less unless the opponent is really hurt or pinned to the ropes. Prates wants his hands readily available to catch any kicks or redirect them for the counter, so even though his hands are high, he has them relaxed and malleable, if that's the right word to use. If he wants to clinch, elbow, catch, he can adjust what he's doing without much effort or movement. He wants to keep those hands reactive. In MMA, fighters are much more intent to hurt with the hands, and Prates is no different. The smaller gloves give much more bang for your buck. With most of his opponents in mixed martial arts having inferior striking, Prates is more confident with his boxing. Like every southpaw, the left hand is his primary focus, and Prates doesn't hide it. In a southpaw vs orthodox matchup, the distance is different, which makes the pull counter a southpaw favourite. Prates can lean back out of the way of any oncoming punches and then nail a left-hand counter, or, being the taller fighter, he can throw left-hand leads which can catch the opponent by surprise. Here we see Prates throw a left-hand lead which drops his opponent. This is obviously good work by Prates, but it's also really poor work from the opposition. For some reason, the opponent decided to switch from his natural orthodox stance into southpaw and line himself up for the punch. This is why switching stance can be so ill-advised unless you are very proficient in both stances. It's one thing to change stance momentarily for a look change or to create some sort of distance before switching stance again, but it's another thing to change stance and try to fight out of it for extended periods of time. You need to have a good understanding of your distance and you need to have good defense when changing stance. I would love to break down Prates' multiple wins in the UFC, him destroying Neil Magny, and his fight with a leech where he just spammed the left hand, but alas, the YouTube copyright police would swiftly strike me down. Here we're going to use some footage shot by video creator Jeff Sinlair from Up in the Stands. Check out his page if you are unfamiliar with his work. As talked about earlier, Prates doesn't mind giving up the lead foot position against orthodox opponents as he trusts his timing to evade a right hand. With his foot inside of the opponent's stance, it brings him closer to the opponent after evading their right hand, which makes it a shorter distance for him to land his own left hand counter. Prates is an experienced striker and he can subconsciously assess his distance very quickly. He has a feel of range which enables him to defend and counter with efficiency. The common theme in a southpaw vs orthodox matchup is to maintain outside foot position to bring yourself further away from the opponent's power side. Because of Prates' experience, he can make this tactical adjustment. Experience can't be bought, it has to be earned, and this is the major advantage he has over pretty much every fighter he will face in mixed martial arts. Prates has an aggressive mindset. Due to the nature of Muay Thai and the distance fighters stand from one another, it makes Prates a naturally more aggressive fighter when it comes to mixed martial arts. In striking sports, you want to be close to your opponent, so you don't have to cover much distance to score. In Muay Thai, you see the fighters continually touching their gloves as it keeps them in range to land kicks, or step into a clinch without much setup. They want to feel where their opponent is. Even a Famur fighter like Sanchai wants to be just outside of arm's reach of an opponent. He's comfortable here as he trusts his eyes and his instincts. Rather than running out the way, he'll often be seen leaning back. This keeps him in position to counter back immediately. Prates might not be a slickster Famur fighter, but he feels comfortable standing right in front of his opponent. He wants to be close, and as spoken about earlier, his confidence in his takedown defense is very important for him to be able to implement his game. Prates has said in multiple interviews his intention is to hurt his opponent. He wants to finish fights, and the intent is to hurt, and that is what makes him so dangerous. As spoken about in the Ilia Topuria breakdown, when you strike with bad intentions and aren't afraid to commit to your shots, you can have a distinct advantage against someone that might not be so sure of themselves. The Nightmare is not a perfect fighter, and he has two major flaws on the feet. The first, he exits back and to the left 90% of the time. It becomes very predictable. Second, he does not have a whole lot of preventative measures when fighting on the back foot. He isn't particularly good at slowing down the pace of a fight, and he can find himself back to the cage wall behind a high guard. These are tendencies that can be exploited by proficient fighters that come with a game plan. As spoken about in many videos, the cage wall can be death in MMA. Unlike a boxing ring where a fighter can lean back against the ropes to create more space and evade strikes, the cage wall pins the fighter upright, and without anything to stop the opponent close the distance, the high guard can quickly turn a man into a punching bag. Just imagine a fighter like Jack Della Maddalena having free reign to punch Carlos Prates to the head and body if he's got him back to the cage wall. His willingness to give up the inside foot position, which serves him well when lining up his own counter left hand, can also put him in trouble when an opponent blitzes him with punches. As Prates likes to lean into his back foot, he can get caught with his head over the back foot and opponents can get on top of him. If your head goes over your back foot, you don't have any balance. Carlos Prates is a fighter who bridges the gap between traditional Muay Thai and modern MMA with remarkable effectiveness. His striking experience, combined with his aggressive mentality, makes him a formidable opponent. However, refining his defensive habits and improving his back foot game will be key to reaching the pinnacle of the sport. As it stands, Prates is a rising star with a skill set that makes him a literal nightmare for anyone in the welterweight division. But whether he has what it takes to become a world champion remains to be seen. As always, thank you for watching the video. If you've made it this far, you may have the attention span it takes to consume more of the in-depth breakdowns I put up on Patreon, especially with regards to positioning and technique. Pro Striking appreciates you more than seeing Carlos Prates take souls with spiteful knees.